Are you a man looking for an intensive program to help you overcome your sexually addictive behaviors? Gateway to Freedom is your answer. Gateway to Freedom is a 3-day intensive workshop for men seeking to overcome sexually addictive behaviors. Whether married, single, or divorced, Gateway to Freedom will help men regain hope for a new life of purity and real contentment. The workshop is conducted by experts in the field of sexual addiction recovery. Your experts have over 35 years of combined experience. Read testimonials of workshop alumni at gatewaymen.com. Get all the info and register online at gatewaymen.com or call 1-800-49-PURITY.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the founder of the Gateway to Freedom workshop. I want to personally invite you to be part of our next workshop, coming up July 24th through the 26th in Colorado. So call us today at 1-800-49-PURITY or visit gatewaymen.com.
Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity. Your hosts for Pure Sex Radio are Jonathan Doherty and Stephen Cervantes. Jonathan is the director of Be Broken Ministries and founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop for Men. Stephen is the founder of the Hope Counseling Center. Visit us online at puresexradio.com. And now, please welcome Jonathan and Stephen on Pure Sex Radio.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Jonathan. I'm here with Stephen. Stephen, how are you?
I am blessed. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I want to just dive right in. We started a series last week where we were looking at this book called Father-Son Accountability that was written by one of our staff members in the Portland area. John Fort and his son Lucas wrote this book, Father-Son Accountability, and it's just rich with all kinds of great insights and wisdom for how dads can create a safe place for their sons to talk about their sexual struggles, and then also for there to even be some mutual accountability and just a developing relationship as a dad leads his son into manhood. So, Stephen, I want to pass it to you, and just we'll continue on where we left off.
Yes, I was saying that I really enjoyed this book because of the openness and honesty and the father-son relationship that was created. And I thought to myself, I wonder if my dad had talked to me like this, how it would have impacted me. How would I be different? How would it have changed me? Because it's taken me a long time to mature emotionally, to learn the language. And I'm a professional counselor, so that's what I do, is go to training, and most people don't know I'm going there for me. I got to learn some new stuff, you know. And so you have to get emotionally healthy, which means you got to loosen yourself from some old bondage stuff and bond yourself or bind yourself to greater truths, right? The Bible talks about loosening and binding, and so I'm always on the mission looking for some greater truth and greater understanding that can set me free and set others free at a deeper level. So when I read this book and I see the honesty and the openness of this dialogue and how the father creates such a safe place for the boy and helps the boy, I mean, I know every man out there listening goes, I wish that would have been a part of my story. I wish my father had been present for me in the struggle. And so that's the richness of this book, and that's a little bit of a review. So in case you're listening to this separate from the other podcast, he goes on and talks about how lust is fired when we experience personal discomfort. So he talks about emotional unmet needs and how those are some of the triggers to lusting. So when you don't feel chosen or loved or valued, if you've just been out there all day and giving and trying and working and you don't feel relationally close and you have this relational need. What's interesting, I'm putting something together as I'm talking here that part of what the bond that he creates with his son is where they process through all of the emotional stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because if I feel lonely and I go in a room by myself and feel alone and lonely and disconnected, lust sort of knocks on the door and says, guess what? Have I got a story for you? Have I got a fantasy for you? You're feeling a little odd, aren't you? Well, I know where to take you. So you can get a thrill and a rush. You can have a little orgasm and a fantasy and a love story in your mind, and you're the hero.
And then you're still alone.
That's the problem. But don't jump ahead here.
Right.
But that's the very true statement. Yeah. And so if your father created a routine where you and he would talk about what's going on with you, and you didn't go to your room alone and listen to the quiet whisper of lust, if your father had checked in with you and said, okay, where are you? What's going on? Are you dragging? What would he have done? He would have pulled you into relationship with himself, right? Mm-hmm. And remember, it's in the, we're aching out there alone. So just part of the solution is to be pulled into somebody's life so we're not left alone.
Right.
And so the very fact that he wants to pull his son in closer starts to minister to the son, mm-hmm. right? And then he does a little check-in. What's going on? How are you feeling? Because he tells his story about his son one day walking and experiencing some lust, and then he does a check-in, and he talks to his dad, and it goes away.
Mm-hmm. And that's the key here. Like the first cycle is where you have a legitimate need. Like, let's use this aloneness example. We have a legitimate need to feel loved, to feel connected, like to be part of relationship.
Yes.
So we have a legitimate need there for acceptance and affirmation, those kind of things. If we are, and what that ends up, if we're not having that need met, or we feel a sense of discomfort because we're having the feelings of loneliness, what ends up happening next is critical, because we either have the temptations that come and kind of woo us into that place of deeper loneliness in order to engage our lust, or if we're establishing healthy relationship and we've got a safe place with our dad and we have these, then there's an outlet that's healthy that allows us to then have those needs met in legitimate ways, where it's a dad speaking words of affection and affirmation, yes, and acceptance into his son's life.
And loneliness sort of goes away.
And what ends up happening is, in that context, then the discomfort that was trying to pull us away into lust is appeased. It's like there's a sense of satisfaction that comes. And I'm not saying it's all rosy and peachy and fuzzy, but in the sense of, like, there's a realness to the relationship.
Yes.
Where there's nothing real, it goes into fantasy with the lust. And so that's, I think, what he's trying to tap in here is, that's why he said earlier in the book that relationship is the absolute key to breaking the lust cycle and also developing a life of sexual integrity.
And don't you think that's true? And where did we as men and boys learn that we really want to be held and loved and nurtured, but then we came up with this goofy sexual way to get it all. Mm-hmm. Right? Because even in our marriages that are difficult, we still want to be loved. We still want to be boys and laugh and play and be light and be loved and be pulled in.
Well, I think because we have falsely assumed that that masculinity means hardness of heart. Mm. and we struggle with what it means to be masculine, and yet we are emotional beings. We have the legitimate needs of affection and being affirmed and being acceptance and being embraced. Those are legitimate needs.
Yes.
And they don't negate masculinity to have those needs met. So the problem is we've sort of made it an either or. Either you're masculine, which means hardness of heart, or you are kind of this effeminate, just sort of girly kind of guy. And it's like, wait a second. You can be fully masculine and yet embrace your son and kiss your son and be held by your wife and all those kind. It's like, that's not girly.
Yeah, no, that's honest. He says we have these needs almost daily. We feel things almost daily. We're going to have some, and he said it's very funny to have to text my own son about my feelings. Mm-hmm. Isn't that, he's being honest here, because it's like the dad is talking about what he's experienced and his emotions. Because remember, the dad's in the same dilemma. If dad doesn't feel loved well, and by family, son, and spouse, then the invitation lust shows up and says, hey, I got a show for you.
And this is something I think we need to talk about, because this is one of the things that he highlights in the book that has the potential to make a lot of dads really uncomfortable. And that is that he is promoting an idea here that says this is a two-way conversation with your son. Now, keep in mind, he is very clear about age appropriateness in terms of the kinds of things you might share with a 10-year-old son and a 16-year-old son and an 18-year-old son.
Yes.
That the dynamic of how the father communicates certain things to his son will change based on the age. However, he's still saying this has to go both ways. We're not doing our sons any favors if we think it's all about just disseminating information downward to them,
yes,
and having the expectation that they're going to share their needs with us and we don't share anything with them. That's setting up, I think, a recipe for failure, because it puts a lot of pressure on the son,
yes,
with there being no accountability for the dad.
Well, and I think the father, in his honesty about what he's experiencing, provides the son with language, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very stressed. It's been a very difficult day, very heavy. I'm tired. I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling overwhelmed. The more honest the dad is, and the point is not to burden son, but to teach emotional language, because, we see people in the office all the time that are emotionally disconnected. Mm-hmm. They're underdeveloped emotionally, and they're disconnected emotionally. And now their spouse says, okay, bring me your good stuff. Bring me your emotional maturity. Bring me your depth. Let's do that bonding thing at a deep level. Come on, bring who you are into this marriage now.
And there's glazed eyes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, there's a game on right now.
Right.
Or this newspaper's calling me, or I've got to go feed the dogs. I cannot engage you. Mm-hmm. But this is the training that a son needs to bond with his very wife, right? And you practice with men need to be doing that bonding also. So I'm going to skip over, because he talks about this next concept, which is kind of interesting. He said a good friend of mine calls this process righteous pleasures. There's some righteous pleasures. I got to back up here a minute. And what are some of these righteous pleasures that are okay? Because we're telling you what's not okay, right?
And these would fall maybe under the category of what we'd call like self-care. Are
yes,
there some things
that's
that are
good.
healthy for self-care?
So what does he say in terms of, you mean are we supposed to get rid of all our pleasures? Isn't pleasure bad? But you're pleasuring yourself. And so you can almost hear a person going, well, we're supposed to get rid of the pleasures, right? Those are bad, aren't they? It's like, hey, we're trying to teach healthy language here. Mm-hmm. Is there goodly pleasure, godly pleasure, righteous pleasure? And in terms of meeting needs. Mm-hmm. And so what would you say God has given you as a righteous pleasure?
Oh, that's easy for me. That's a round of golf. I mean, really, it is. It's one of those things where I feel like I don't. It's funny because early on in ministry, if I were to take, let's say, an afternoon off and go play around in golf, I kind of struggled with this sense of guilt. And I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't working hard the rest of the time. And kind of the way my schedule works, sometimes I'm working over weekends, and so just taking some time off during the week. But I've gotten to a place now where I feel no shame for taking a morning or an afternoon off and saying, I'm going to go play around in golf. I enjoy the nature. I feel...
And you just go by yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you're outside.
I end up pairing up with somebody at the course or something, and so I get to meet new people, but I also I see that as something where it refreshes me. And
because there's no pressure, there's no expectation.
I don't feel any guilt about it anymore either. It's just like, this is one of the ways that God has created me and that sport and his nature, and it's just a way for me to get refreshed.
So I think walking, I love looking at nature and walking and just talking to God. Mm-hmm. And it refreshes me, and it gets me. If I'm in the house, I got to sweep some, put something up, something's out of place. Do something. You got to do household things, And if you're at work, you got to do work things. But when you get out, it's like, we really have real needs, and we really get tired. And so part of the process is owning the things that energize us and doing some of those things. And part of a healthy program is knowing when you're low, right, and dragging and doing relationship, but also doing spiritual work.
And in this context of father-son accountability, I think this is also part of the training that fathers need to do for sons, is because it can get very confusing. Like we had said in the previous broadcast, there's this 600% increase in testosterone dump in a boy's body during puberty. And so think about it, Stephen. You have this boy that now all of a sudden everything is just ramped up sexually. His entire biology is just racing all the time. And he's being told by parents and by pastors and all these other people about controlling sexuality and making sure that don't look at porn, and that's all healthy and good. But then he's not necessarily being told about what are some healthy pleasures.
Yes.
What are some of these righteous pleasures? Is it okay for you to enjoy a movie with your friends and eat an entire pizza? Is that okay? On a Friday night? That's fine. Mm-hmm. And that he doesn't need to feel guilty about everything that feels good.
That's good.
And so
because he says, trained in that. When we feel taken care of, we do not need a fantasy to take care of us. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what you're talking about, right? We're plugged into the right places and getting energized in a relationship in the right order. We're owning our emotional struggles. Fantasy is less needed. Mm-hmm. He said we will grow tired and we will want to return to places that speak our language. That's normal. We just have to not give up. We will become comfortable eventually in this new process. But when we get broken down, the old ways want to come back, and we're trying to create a whole new template. And
that's where I would say for dads here, I think this is where it's important to just create a level of consistency in this, and maybe I should say persistency, because you know what? When you start having these kind of dialogues, when you start sharing your own needs and feelings with your son, and you're asking him to do the same, it is going to feel awkward. You're probably going to have plenty of these conversations where you finish these conversations and go, I feel like that totally flopped. It didn't seem to go anywhere. It just kind of laid flat. And the temptation you will have is to get discouraged, and in that discouragement, then just kind of bail out altogether and just go back to your own sort of separate lives and just see how it works out. Instead, keep pressing in, because what he's saying here is you're going to grow tired and want to return to places that, that speak your language, and it's okay. That's normal, but keep pressing in. Don't bail out of these types of engagements with your son.
Yes. So I want to read another paragraph. It says, while we sometimes need to ask questions to bring sin into light, most questioning should not be about behaviors we're trying to stop. Did you do that? Did you stop it? You should be stopped. Don't do that anymore. Remember, he said, the focus of accountability is not stopping something. The most important questions we ask are to help each other determine what unmet needs drove us to seek the comfort of lust. So what's going on? Understand yourself better. He goes on to say, he says, fathers need to step down a little from the parent role and move a little closer to brother in Christ role when questioning our sons.
Yeah.
And you were saying that about your own son, right?
Yeah, I think the thing is we have to recognize, even though, yes, there is the father-son dynamic, and there's a sense of, there is a role of responsibility and authority that we have been given over our sons, we're still both male. And I think that's very important to remember, that we are still both male. So in a very real sense, we are struggling with similar issues. He's struggling with it from a son's, a child's perspective. We're struggling with it from an adult's perspective. But still, we are both male. We need to be able to talk about things kind of on the same plane. And again, keeping in mind there's different age appropriateness as you go through this.
I love the fact that that's about accountability. Then he switches over to talking about willpower. And he says this, each day we start out with a certain amount of willpower, and we drain that supply all day long with each decision we make. Isn't that so true? Mm-hmm. And one book said willpower is like a muscle. You're so strong. In the beginning you're fresh, but by the end of the day your back hurts and your muscles hurt and you're tired. You got no oomph.
Yeah.
So he says when our willpower is low or gone, we give in to whatever is the easiest to do. And lust is always the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think these are great training points, not only for fathers, but for fathers to give to sons, to let them know, hey, you know the reason why you're kind of, you might put it this way, you're kind of morally tired at the end of the day, like where you might start your day and feel like I want to make good decisions and I want to resist temptation and I want to please God and I want to do, and then by the end of the day you're kind of like, oh man, yeah, I don't want to eat healthy. I don't want to
turn the TV on.
Yeah, I want to just
escape somewhere.
And he needs, and your son needs to know that. That's part of this cycle of life. And how is he going to respond to that? And how are you guys going to have conversations about it?
So he says you can't have more than 3 goals, and it's fine if you have less than 3. Each week we go over what we did last week and whether we met those goals or not. And so that's a quote that he's quoting someone else. But I thought you do have to kind of limit this, right? You have to have some sort of goals you're moving towards and some things you're staying away from. And this could be overwhelming, right? You don't want to make it that overwhelming.
And here's the thing that I think is important. Growing as a man, not only growing into manhood, but growing as a man is a lifelong venture. I think it'd be terrible for us to try to create the expectation in our sons that when they reach a certain time, let's say 18 years old or 20 years old, then they are fully developed as a man. I think what we need to do is we need to set our sons on a course of ongoing growth as a man. Yeah, there will be some moments where it's like, hey, we're gonna kind of commission you into manhood, like I did with my son. It's like, hey, we're starting this journey at 13. We're starting the training to develop you into manhood. But as a man, you're never going to be outside the realm of needing to grow. And so I think setting really kind of small, achievable goals that start letting you know, hey, here's what we're holding each other accountable on. This is what we're moving toward, without it seeming like a gigantic textbook, is the best way to, I think, move forward with your son.
Good. So let me jump over to something else he says about teenagers. He says there's been a lot of research in the past decade on how decision-making works in adolescence. What's been discovered is young people under 25 do not make decisions the same way older adults do. And this is very important to understand when doing father-son accountability. So the brain doesn't finish developing to 25. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting just what you're talking about. You're going to have to get your son from age 13 to 25, right? And a lot of people would call those are early adolescent years and young adulthood. And, of course, they're stupid, and you should expect less of them. But he says there really is something to their thought process. Mm-hmm. And so then what does that mean to you? Because when you're a kid, you still think like a kid, like a young adult, right?
Well, what that means to me is that a father has to come with a different set of expectations than with his son than he would with, let's say, a peer. If I'm going to be in an accountability relationship with a peer, a guy in his 40s, you know what? I don't have to. I can have the same expectations of him that I would have of myself. With my 13-year-old, if I do that, it's going to be very, very soon that he is going to feel completely discouraged. He's probably going to feel like a failure. He's probably going to feel like he can't get anything right. And because his brain itself has not been developed fully. And so there are certain things that he simply cannot understand, that he's going to have many more failures and struggles with just for that fact alone. And so the way he processes thoughts, the way he processes decisions, and I have to come with him with the expectation he's not fully developed. So I have to have a different sense of I guess you could say slowness in developing him, and realizing it's going to take a lot of repetition, and there's going to have to be a lot of grace and just real slow intentionality to where he can develop at the pace that his body will allow him to develop.
And he might make mistakes, and he may need more of all those things that we as adults need also.
He'll need a lot more patience.
Yes. I want you to read a section here, but let me make a comment. He says, there's no way to ensure that our children will not see pornography. It's nearly inevitable that they will. That does not mean that we shouldn't do everything in our power to try to prevent it, but we also must have empathy for times they fail with pornography or fantasy. And that's sort of relieving, right? Because you could have such a high standard that they would never do it, but in all probability, they're going to find it somewhere. And so it's better to have a plan in place with the goal of, you not making it accessible, right? So do you want to make a comment, or do you want to give them a flavor of something was said in the book?
Well, I'll just go ahead and read this story here. It says, consider a 14-year-old boy who's been doing accountability with his father for 2 years. He knows all the reasons why he should avoid pornography. He actually agrees that looking at porn will harm him in his relationships with others and God. The boy's uncle is visiting for the holidays and staying in their home. One day the teenager is left alone at home, and he notices his uncle left his laptop on and open. In an instant, the boy's brain realizes that right in front of him is an unlimited world of pornography waiting to be explored. The rational part of his brain protests, but is completely drowned out by his desire to see a naked woman. He forgets every reason not to look at pornography and indulges. Afterward, the boy feels great shame and becomes anxious about the inevitable time when he has to tell his father what he has done.
Don't you just love that? It's an honest story about, I shouldn't do it, but here it is. I can gorge. I can go to the trough and gorge, and it'll be just great pleasure, delight. And then later, oh no, I'm going to have to tell.
And here's the agreement I've made with my son, and my daughters too. I made the agreement. I said, if you ever look at porn, for no matter what reason, whether you did it willfully or whether you stumbled into it, you will never be in trouble with me for telling me about it. Because it's not, like he said earlier, it's not about punishment. It's not about, let's focus on the failure. What is it about? Son, let's talk about when you saw that laptop and you had that urge, what's the need that was there? Let's explore that, because I want you to be able to go in a direction of getting that need met in a healthy way. And you're not
knowing yourself.
You are not in trouble for having that response and doing what you did. I want to draw you back into relationship and into fellowship and connection.
Because that's what the Father wants from us, right? Relationship, connection, presence. Take your needs to Him.
So, folks, we think this is an excellent book and resource for fathers and sons. You can get it at our store online at pureliferesources.com. It's simply called Father-Son Accountability by John and Lucas Fort. And we're glad you've been with us here this week, and we look forward to having you back here next week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
God bless.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.